The city of Viridia was a place of two worlds. Under the bright, cheerful sun, it was all bustling markets and laughing children, a perfect picture of everyday life. But when the moon rose, the city whispered secrets, secrets that clung to the shadows and spoke of a man named Marco Rossi. Lily, a young woman of 23 with a heart too big for her own good, knew nothing of these moonlit whispers. Her world was one of simple joys, the smell of old books from the library where she worked, the comforting sound of her best friend Sophia's laughter, and the quiet certainty that each day would be much like the last. She was, in many ways, a beautiful secret waiting to be discovered, a song no one had ever heard. This summer, however, was destined to be different. Sophia, her friend since they were little girls building forts out of blankets, had insisted Lily spend the entire summer at the Rossi family estate. The invitation was a beacon of light, promising long days by the pool, late-night talks with bowls of ice cream, and a break from the gentle monotony of her life. Lily packed her bags with a light heart, folding her simple sundresses next to her well-loved novels, completely unaware that she was walking into a world far more complex and dangerous than any story she had ever read. The Rossi estate stood on a hill, a grand, old house that seemed to watch over the city with a silent, knowing gaze. The iron gates swung open slowly, as if reluctant to admit a new soul into their midst. The driveway was long, lined with tall, ancient trees that cast dancing shadows on the path. As Lily got out of her car, the first thing she noticed was the silence. It wasn't a peaceful quiet, but a heavy, waiting kind of hush, as if the very air was holding its breath. The house itself was magnificent, all pale stone and gleaming windows, but it felt more like a fortress than a home. Sophia burst through the front door, her smile as bright and warm as ever, shattering the tense atmosphere for a moment. She ran to Lily and pulled her into a tight, familiar hug. "You're finally here. I've been counting down the days," she exclaimed, her voice full of genuine excitement. She grabbed Lily's bags and led her inside, chattering a mile a minute about all their plans for the summer. The inside of the house was just as impressive as the outside, filled with expensive-looking art and furniture, but it also felt strangely empty, like a museum after closing time. It was then that Lily saw him. A figure emerged from a doorway down the long, marble-tiled hall. He was taller than she remembered, and the boyish softness she recalled from their childhood was gone, replaced by the hard, sharp lines of a man. This was Marco, Sophia's older brother. He stood with a stillness that was both powerful and unnerving. He was dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored dark suit, and his eyes, a deep, penetrating shade of brown, found hers instantly. For a single, heart-stopping moment, Lily felt the air leave her lungs. That funny, fluttering feeling in her stomach, one she had never felt before, took flight. Sophia followed her gaze. "Marco! Look who's finally here," she called out, her voice echoing in the vast space. Marco's expression did not change. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "Lily," he said, and her name, spoken in his low, calm voice, sounded like a secret. He didn't say welcome. He didn't smile. He simply looked at her, and in that look, Lily felt as if he could see right through her, past her smile and her summer dresses, down to the very core of her innocent soul. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back through the doorway, leaving a chill in the air where he had been. Later that evening, after Sophia had shown Lily to a beautiful guest room with a view of the sprawling garden, the two friends were in the kitchen making dinner. The mood was light again, filled with their easy camaraderie. That's when Marco walked in. He went straight to the refrigerator, his presence immediately shifting the energy in the room. Sophia, trying to bridge the silence, said, "Isn't it great having Lily here for the whole summer, Marco? It's going to be so much fun." Marco closed the refrigerator door, a bottle of water in his hand. He turned his head slowly toward his sister, his eyes briefly flicking to Lily before settling back on Sophia. His voice was flat and final. "Having a guest is a problem, Sophia. You know that." The words were like a slap. Lily felt her cheeks grow warm with embarrassment and hurt. She looked down at the floor, suddenly feeling very small and very much in the way. Sophia started to protest, but Marco cut her off with a look. "The rules of this house have not changed," he said, and then he left, leaving the two girls in a stunned silence. The following days were a strange mix of summer bliss and underlying tension. During the days, Lily and Sophia would lounge by the pool, their laughter echoing across the water. They would go into the city, shopping and eating ice cream cones, and for those few hours, everything felt normal and happy. But back at the estate, Marco was a constant, shadowy presence. Lily found herself trying to avoid him, taking different hallways if she saw him coming, But it seemed the big house was determined to push them together. She would be reading in the library, and he would walk in to retrieve a book, standing so close she could smell his clean, sharp scent of soap and something else, something dark and wild like sandalwood. She would be helping the housekeeper set the table for dinner, and he would enter the dining room, his mere presence making her fumble with the silverware. She noticed the men who were always around him. They were not like any men she had ever known. They were quiet, moved with a purpose, and their eyes were always watching, always assessing. They spoke to Marco with a deep respect that bordered on fear, calling him sir or boss. Lily began to understand that the whispers about Marco in the city were not just stories. One afternoon, needing a break from the oppressive atmosphere inside the house, Lily decided to explore the garden. It was a beautiful, wild place, with hidden pathways and benches tucked away among the rose bushes. As she turned a corner, she heard low, serious voices. It was two of Marco's men, standing near a tall hedge, thinking they were alone. They were talking about a man named Silas, the leader of a rival group. They spoke of a deal gone wrong, of a threat, of Silas's men planning to ambush Marco to send a message. Lily's blood ran cold. She pressed herself against the rough bark of a large tree, her heart hammering against her ribs. She shouldn't be listening. Marco's warning echoed in her mind. This was not safe. But the thought of Marco being hurt, of walking into a trap, filled her with a terror that was sharp and immediate. Without stopping to think, without considering the consequences, she knew she had to warn him. She found him in his office, a room she had never dared to enter. The door was slightly ajar. She pushed it open. Marco was standing by a large window, his back to her, looking out over the city. The room was filled with the scent of old leather and the faint smell of his cologne. "Marco?" she said, her voice barely a whisper. He turned, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of genuine surprise on his face. It was quickly replaced by a mask of impatience. "Lily, you shouldn't be in here," he said, his tone firm. The words tumbled out of her in a rushed, frightened jumble. "I was in the garden. I heard two of your men talking, about a man named Silas. They said his men are planning to ambush you, they know where you're going to be tomorrow night." She was trembling, clutching her hands together to stop them from shaking. Marco was utterly still. He didn't interrupt her. He just watched her, his dark eyes taking in her frightened state, the sincerity in her wide eyes. When she finished, the room was silent. He walked toward her, his steps slow and deliberate, until he was standing right in front of her. He was so close she could see the tiny flecks of gold in his brown eyes. The anger she expected was not there. Instead, his gaze was intense, searching. "Thank you for telling me," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. The sound of it sent a shiver down her spine. He reached out, and for a heart-stopping moment, she thought he might touch her face. But he didn't. He let his hand fall. "That was very brave," he continued. "But also very foolish. You must promise me you will never put yourself in a position to hear things like that again." "My world." He paused, his eyes sweeping over her face, from her worried eyes to her slightly parted lips. "My world is not a safe place for someone like you." In that moment, something fundamental shifted between them. He was no longer just Sophia's scary older brother. He was a man looking at a woman who had, in her own innocent and brave way, stepped into his dark world to protect him. And Lily was no longer just a nervous guest. She was the one person who had seen a crack in his armor, and in that crack, she saw not a monster, but a man. The first chapter of their story had ended, and a new, much more dangerous one, was about to begin. The silence in the grand house felt different after Lily's warning. It was no longer just a heavy, oppressive quiet, but a charged and waiting stillness, as if the very walls were aware that a line had been crossed. Marco had acted swiftly on the information she provided, his commands issued in low, urgent tones to his men that sent them scattering into the night. The planned ambush was circumvented, a bloodless victory won from the shadows, and all because of the quiet girl in the guest room. This knowledge hung in the air between them, an unspoken truth that transformed every casual glance into a loaded conversation. Lily found she could not sleep. The moon was full, casting a pale, silver light through her window that painted long, ghostly fingers across the floor. The image of Marco's face, the intense, searching look in his eyes when she had told him about Silas, played over and over in her mind. She felt a strange restlessness, a humming in her veins that was equal parts fear and a thrilling, terrifying excitement. Slipping out of bed, she pulled on a soft robe and quietly made her way downstairs, drawn by the need for fresh air and space to untangle her knotted emotions. The night garden was a world transformed from its sunny daytime self. It was a kingdom of shadows and silver, where the scent of night-blooming jasmine was intoxicatingly strong. She walked along the gravel path, the stones cool beneath her bare feet, until she found a small, secluded stone bench hidden by a curtain of weeping willow trees. It was here, surrounded by the gentle rustle of leaves, that the weight of everything finally crashed down upon her. The fear, the confusion, the undeniable pull she felt toward a man who was everything she knew she should avoid, it all welled up inside her, and hot, silent tears began to trace paths down her cheeks. She cried not for pity, but for the sheer, overwhelming confusion of it all. She did not hear him approach. His movements were as silent as the night itself. One moment she was alone with her tears, and the next, a large, warm presence was beside her. Marco sat down on the bench, his size making the space feel suddenly very small. He did not speak at first. He simply looked at her, his face illuminated by the moonlight, making his sharp features look both softer and more severe. He was not wearing his suit jacket, just a simple white shirt, the top button undone, and he looked more like the boy she faintly remembered, yet more a man than ever. "Lily," he said, and her name was a soft breath in the quiet night. He did not ask why she was crying. He seemed to understand without words. He simply shrugged out of his own tailored waistcoat and draped it carefully over her shoulders. The fine, dark wool was still warm from his body and carried his distinct, clean scent, a mix of sandalwood and the night air. The gesture was so unexpectedly gentle, so protective, that it nearly made her cry all over again. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, feeling vulnerable and exposed. "You scare me, Marco," she whispered, the admission torn from the deepest, most honest part of her soul. It was not just the danger he represented, but the way he made her feel, the way her heart raced, the way her thoughts scattered, the way she was constantly aware of where he was in a room. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze holding her as captive. The world seemed to shrink to this small bench, to the space between their bodies. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough, like stones tumbling in a deep river. "Good," he said, the word simple and devastating. "Because I can't promise I will ever let you go." The statement was not a threat, but a raw, breathtaking confession. It was the truth of a man who commanded everything he saw, finally admitting he had found something he was powerless to resist. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray tear from her cheek. The touch was electric, sending a jolt of pure sensation through her entire body. It was the first time he had intentionally touched her, and it felt like a brand. He began to talk then, his voice a low, steady murmur in the dark. He spoke of his world, not in detail, but in feelings, the constant weight of responsibility, the ever-present shadows, the coldness that had seeped into his bones after his father's death. "I live in a world of darkness, Lily," he confessed, his thumb stroking the back of her hand where it rested on the bench. "A world where trust is a weapon and kindness is a weakness. And then there is you." He looked at her, his eyes blazing with a fierce, possessive light. "You are the only light I have seen in years. You are a sunrise in the middle of my endless night. Your innocence isn't a flaw, it's a power. It's the one thing that makes me feel human." His words washed over her, healing the hurt and banishing the fear. They made her feel not like a naive child, but like the most powerful woman in the world. He was Marco Rossi, the man who ruled a city from the shadows, and he was looking at her as if she held his entire universe in her hands. He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, his eyes asking a silent question. But Lily was done pulling away. Her heart was beating a wild, joyful rhythm, and she met him halfway. The kiss was not rushed or demanding. It was slow, deep, and achingly tender. It was a discovery. It was her first kiss, and it felt like the only kiss that had ever mattered. It was a promise sealed in the moonlight, a silent vow between a man of shadows and a woman of light. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her securely against his chest, and she melted into him, her hands coming up to rest on his shoulders. In that moment, the last remnants of her old life fell away. The girl who had saved herself for love had found it in the most forbidden of places, and she knew, with a certainty that shook her to her core, that she would never be the same. When they finally parted, breathless and forever changed, they made a pact. They would keep this new, fragile, miraculous thing a secret from Sophia, for now. They knew she would be hurt and confused, and they needed time to let their love grow strong enough to face the storm of her reaction. The rest of the summer became a secret treasure, a series of stolen moments that were more precious than anything Lily had ever known. A brush of hands as they passed in the hallway, a long, lingering look across the dinner table that only they understood, a late-night meeting in the garden where they would talk for hours, his arm around her, her head on his shoulder. Lily was learning the language of Marco's heart, and he was rediscovering the meaning of warmth in her smile. They were a secret team, building a world for two within the gilded cage of his life, unaware that outside the garden walls, the dangers of his world were already circling, closer than they could possibly imagine. The secret world that Lily and Marco had built in the moonlit garden could not last forever. The real world, with its harsh truths and dangerous players, was always waiting just beyond the rose bushes. For a few blissful weeks, their hidden love was the only thing that felt real. Lily moved through the sunny days with Sophia with a new, secret joy glowing inside her, a light that only Marco could see. Their stolen moments were the fuel that kept them both going, a brief touch of his hand on the small of her back as she passed him in the hall, the way his eyes would find hers from across the room, speaking volumes without a single word. He was still the feared Marco Rossi to everyone else, but to Lily, in the quiet of his study late at night, he was just a man who held her hand and told her stories about the stars. This fragile peace was shattered on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. Sophia had asked Lily to pick up a special order from a small bakery in the city. It was a simple errand, a task she had done a dozen times before. She walked the familiar route, humming a tune, thinking of the book she and Marco had been reading together. She never noticed the sleek, black car that slid to a quiet stop beside her. She never saw the two large men get out. It happened in a terrifying, blurry instant. A hand clamped over her mouth, stifling her scream. Another grabbed her arm, and she was being forcefully, quickly guided toward the open door of the car. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird, her mind screaming one name, Marco. But Marco's protection was a vast, invisible net around the city. Before the car door could even close, another vehicle, one she recognized as belonging to Marco's men, swerved to block the street. His men moved with a swift, brutal efficiency, their faces like stone. The would-be kidnappers were disarmed and subdued in seconds, the entire confrontation over before most people on the street even realized what was happening. One of Marco's men, a serious-faced man named Enzo, gently helped a trembling Lily to her feet. "The boss will be informed immediately," he said, his voice tight with a mixture of anger and relief. Back at the estate, the atmosphere was like a brewing storm. Marco arrived within minutes, his face a terrifying mask of cold fury. When he saw Lily, safe but shaking on the sofa in the living room, the ice in his eyes cracked, revealing a raw, primal fear. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. He buried his face in her hair, his entire body trembling with the force of his emotions. In that moment, she felt the true weight of the world he lived in, a world where a simple walk to a bakery could end in a nightmare. Later that evening, he came to her room. His expression was grim, resolved. "You have to leave, Lily," he said, his voice hollow. "You will go tomorrow morning. Enzo will drive you back to your apartment." He explained that Silas, the rival, had clearly identified her as his weakness, and that this attack was only the beginning. "I brought you into this darkness," he whispered, his hand cupping her face, his thumb stroking her cheek. "The only way I can keep you safe is to let you go. I love you too much to let my world destroy you." The words were a physical pain in her chest. Leaving him felt like tearing out her own heart. She argued, she pleaded, but his decision was final, forged in the fire of his fear for her life. He was pushing her away to save her, and the noble, heartbreaking sacrifice made her love him even more. The house that night was filled with a profound sorrow. Lily packed her bags with tears streaming down her face, each folded dress a memory of the happy summer that had ended in tragedy. It was then that Sophia, having sensed the terrible tension, found her. She saw the packed bags and her best friend's tear-stained face. "Lily, what's going on? Why are you packing?" she asked, her voice filled with confusion and concern. The truth, in all its messy, complicated glory, came tumbling out. Lily, with a breaking heart, confessed everything: the garden, the kisses, the secret love, the kidnapping attempt, and Marco's decision to send her away. Sophia's face cycled through a torrent of emotions: shock, betrayal, anger. "You and my brother," she said, her voice rising. "All this time? Behind my back? How could you lie to me, Lily? You're my best friend." The argument that followed was fierce and painful, filled with hurtful words and tearful accusations. Sophia felt betrayed by the two people she loved most, their secret feeling like a wall built between them all summer. Lily, her own heart breaking, stood her ground. She looked her best friend in the eye, her voice shaking but clear. "He is not the monster people say he is, Sophia. I see the real Marco. I see the boy who used to walk us home, the brother you used to laugh with. He's still in there, trapped by all this darkness. I love him. And I know he loves me. He's sending me away because he loves me, not because he doesn't want me. Something in Sophia's face shifted as she listened. She saw the genuine, unwavering love in Lily's eyes. She remembered the change in her brother, the slight softening of his edges, the rare glimpses of the man he was before their father's death. The anger drained from her, replaced by a dawning understanding, and then a fierce, protective loyalty. She let out a long breath, her shoulders slumping. I can't believe this, she murmured, but then she looked at Lily, her best friend since childhood, and she made a choice. She pulled Lily into a tight, forgiving hug. Okay, she whispered. Okay. If you love him, then we fight for him. Together. The next morning, as Enzo waited by the car, Lily walked not toward him, but into Marco's office. Marco stood by his desk, his back to her, his posture rigid with grief. You should be gone, he said, his voice rough. I'm not leaving, Lily declared, her voice strong and sure. Marco turned, shock etched on his face. Sophia stepped into the doorway behind Lily, a silent show of solidarity. Lily walked right up to him, looking up into his stunned eyes. You told me I was the light in your darkness, she said. You don't get to send your light away. Your world is dangerous, but my world is empty and colorless and meaningless without you in it. I am not a porcelain doll you need to put on a high shelf to keep safe. I am strong. I am yours. And I will stay and fight with you. It was the moment Marco Rossi, the untouchable mafia boss, truly fell to his knees. Not physically, but in his soul. Her courage, her unwavering faith, shattered the last of his defenses. With Lily and Sophia by his side, a new, unbreakable strength filled him. He was no longer just fighting to protect an empire, he was fighting to protect his family, his future. The plan they formed was not one of brute force, but of brilliant strategy, using Lily's innocence as the ultimate disguise to lure Silas into a trap of their own making. In a final, decisive confrontation, Marco, empowered by love and not just power, outsmarted and captured his enemy, securing the city not through more fear, but through a stronger, more resilient peace. The story ends not with a bang, but with a soft, warm silence in the Rossi estate. The three of them, Marco, Lily, and Sophia, are sharing a long, late dinner in the garden, the very place where it all began. The table is lit by candlelight, and the air is filled with the sound of easy laughter and the clinking of glasses. Marco's hand rests over Lily's on the table, their fingers intertwined. He looks at her, his dark eyes no longer holding shadows, but reflecting the warm, golden light of the flames. He had built an empire on fear, but she had built a kingdom in his heart. He had shown her a world of danger, but she had shown him that love was the only thing truly worth fighting for. They had both been saved, not from the outside world, but from the loneliness within their own hearts, proving that even in the darkest of lives, a single, brave heart can bring the dawn. If you were moved by Lily and Marco's journey from forbidden secret to unbreakable love, subscribe for more stories of heart-twisting romance, fierce loyalty, and the power of love to conquer all.